Yo, what's up? Two interesting changes today to Enlisted. First of all, regarding the Japanese Soviets event, you now get an automatic join any army setup. This means you cannot choose your army anymore. Of course, you can look at your armies, but you cannot change this. So, this, as I described yesterday, is meant to mitigate the issue of every sweat lord wanting to play Soviets to get easy wins instead of fighting honorably for the emperor. Yeah. So because everyone fucking wanted to play Japanese Soviets. Now the biggest downside of this is that I wanted to finally do a Japanese only stream playing this event, but now I can't even do that. So yeah, even if Gaijin does something reasonable, even that has some downsides. Okay. Then a small correction. Yesterday I said you have to play every day to get the main prize here. Well, the event goes for 14 days and you have 12 stages, so you can miss out 2 days. Okay, at least something, though why the fuck not make it 15 days to get a round number? Yeah, so average Gaijin moment. But okay. Yeah, I know 14 days are 2 weeks, but still. You can just be generous, because being generous usually makes your customers happy. But okay. And now the main part, the Berlin maps are now officially open to all BRs. So depending on what BR you were using for your army in the past, you could only play Berlin maps if you were BR 3, 4, 5 as Germans or Soviets. Now you can also access these maps as BR 1 or 2 Germans or Soviets. So all BRs. Is this good? Yes or no? It's, well, first of all, there are multiple effects. You have a wide area of consequences, and depending on what preferences a player had, he might experience upsides or downsides, but basically every player will experience a mix of results from this change. So it's not a black or white issue. Every time there's a nuanced situation like this, you're searching for the overall effect. Now what's the overall effect? I have to conclude it's an overall positive good change. Why? Because now there's more flexibility. And most importantly, people who like Berlin maps aren't forced to play high BR anymore. Now they can also enter these maps with low BR stuff, which adds a bit of more historical or additional ways to experience historical accuracy. Because guess what? In late war, especially, literally early 45, in the last weeks of the war, I think the Battle for Berlin took place over like 3 weeks or so. It was very quickly over. Like once the Soviets had 3 big artillery areas, not even batteries, areas set up with their own railway supply for shells. Yeah, it was literally over. And in order to experience this, you might want to play, let's say, some very low quality Volkssturm trash weapons from the Germans. Yep, so, but obviously you can't do this if you give them FG42s, and in the past you couldn't properly do it. So now everyone who wants to do this, he can do it. Keep in mind, I said in the past, everyone who wants to do this, he could just build a BR1 army, and then give the army one BR5 weapon. And then you never use that weapon, or you never even use the squad that has that weapon, and congratulations, you can play BR1 and BR5 maps now. But still, it was annoying. Also, you weren't... Well, what if you wanted to play against other enemies of similar strength to get fair matches? You couldn't do this, but now you can do it, yeah? So, yeah, this literally increases the amount of choices and flexibilities players have. So, quite good. How historically accurate is that? Well, as I said, the famous Volkssturm used many bad weapons, but they also used some high-quality weapons. If the Volkssturm was lucky enough to get access to a machine gun, they used an MG34 and MG42. Most likely MG42 because it was cheaper and easier to take care of. Much easier, especially for very quickly trained or more or less untrained people. So yeah. And, well, also the Volkssturm famously had a good supply of Panzerfaust, which are obviously BR 3 and 4. This is the big limitation. Like, if you want to roleplay historically accurate Volkssturm, there are some BR 3 weapons that you cannot play on low BR. So yeah, and sadly there's no mixing of BRs to get an average BR. Nope, it's literally the highest weapon decides. Also, historically speaking, both armies had what Enlisted refers to as high BR vehicles. The tanks were mostly high BR. The planes were mostly high BR during the Battle of Berlin. But the guns, this is where it becomes, where you see that the weapon technology is not linear. The Germans, well, some of them had STGs, especially still high quality elite forces had STGs and had lots of machine guns. But obviously the Volkssturm had all of those Kriegsmodel K98Ks and other trash guns, alright? So a very mixed bag. The Soviets, though, they also had something similar because they, well, of course the Soviets had a much higher concentration of semi-auto rifles than the Germans. They were famous for that. Also, they fielded their companies of 50 or 100 soldiers all equipped with SMGs, yep, often famously PPSH and so on, yes. But still, roughly half of them, very roughly speaking, depending on which unit you looked at, still had their Mosins. So they also had what Enlisted would call BR1 stuff, very casually, like very standardized, equipped in the armies. Also important to note, the PPSs that are placed on BR2 in Enlisted, PPS 42, PPS 43, they were mid to late war developments. There were standardization, there were simplifications of the PPSHs. So the PPSHs that are BR5 in Enlisted, or BR4 if they were downranked already, though I don't remember, and the PPDs, well, the PPDs were very early. They were developed during the 1930s, and the PPSHs came in the early 40s. They are much stronger than the PPSs, but, well, they were more complicated to produce. And obviously, once the war turned into an attrition battle, standardization of production was more important than individual weapon quality. Yeah. Sometimes, though, by the way, this is what obviously made the PPSs a bit weaker. Their magazines were smaller. But if you have only 35 round magazines or 30 round magazines, you don't suffer from the jamming that the drum makes of the PPDs and PPSHs had. Yeah, so despite that, though, the PPSHs had famously very high quality. Like they could, I think, on average fire 50,000 bullets until until they were not usable anymore, which is an insane amount of bullets for a weapon like this. So especially quickly manufactured one. You know, a real wonder of firearm production, the PPSHs, high quality guns. Some of them were even used in the last 10-20 years around the world in battles. Yeah, so PPSHs, very high quality weapons. So the classical case of quantity over quality. Fun fact, the Germans had it very good with the MG42 because that one gave them quantity and quality, because compared to the previous MG34, the MG42 wasn't just cheaper and faster and easier to produce, and also mostly more easier to handle in field and repair, but it also was much stronger due to the significantly higher fire rate, being especially more effective against targets from far away or fast moving targets. So yeah, like it's not always like that something that's cheaper to produce is worse. No, sometimes just better technology or better manufacturing as the stand parts of the MG42 mean that you get an overall better product. How good was the MG42? Well, it was so good that Germany and some other nations still use it today under the name of M3. I use it myself during the army. Yep, it's literally like the reloading, the barrel change and so on. It's basically the same. It's a very strong, high quality weapon. All right, so what are your opinions on this change? I already uploaded a poll where you can decide and say, okay, what do you like? And also, what are your nuanced takes on this? Because, yeah, like overall, I would say this is a good change. Now, I posted in the forum that we need the same treatment for Tunisia and Moscow to be open up to higher BR stuff. Because, yeah, there will be some discussions. I already had a video about it explaining that literally all the Berlin maps, chronologically speaking, if they were fought for in 1941, most of them were also fought for again in 1944. Because the front line went eastwards and then back westwards, and you fought for the same areas. You had multiple battles for Kiev. You had multiple battles for many other areas. So yeah, like it's ridiculous how some people literally don't understand that that you don't fight only once for a spot during the whole war. No, many spots were fought over multiple times. Yeah, so yeah, like Moscow by all logic needs to be a BR5 map, or like BR5 campaign with all of its maps. Especially since most of the maps aren't even real places, they're just generic random Eastern European places that could be in any random Eastern European country. So yeah, and I hear the argument sometimes, oh, but the maps aren't meant for strong high BR tanks. Well, nope. That's a very weak argument. Most of these maps are randomly designed. They don't have real optimization for one tank type or another. No. Like, they would be playable for one or for the other. Like, come on. It's literally... nope. Yeah? But by that logic, you would have to say that none of the Berlin maps are optimized for high BR tanks, because the tanks constantly get stuck. And it actually is much easier and more effective to drive small low BR tanks through the streets of Berlin. Yeah, this is a proper argument, because this is absolutely evident. But saying that, oh, the Moscow maps aren't good for Tigers, no, motherfucker, that's not the case. Yeah. Also, it will be historically accurate if Tigers and Panthers drive over maps like these, because that's what happened from 1942, 3, and 4, and 5 eventually. So yeah. Yeah, overall I would say it needs to be expanded into making just all maps flexible and just give everyone what he wants to play. Yeah. This is what needs to be done. And then we can just play all the maps again, because it's just annoying. And also many people don't like playing high BR because of the high power level, but they still want to experience the maps. Yeah. By the way, there's the reverse argument. Some players don't like the low BR guns. They'd rather have high BR stuff, but they would like to play Tunisia and Moscow maps. Yeah, well for them obviously it makes sense to open up the low BR stuff. So yeah, alright. Now prepare for the stream today in a few hours. You can vote during the stream what I'm gonna play. Either I'm gonna lose brain cells during the event, or I'm gonna just play a nice comfy, I would say mid BR3 army to get to fight for the streets of Berlin. I don't care whether Soviets or Germany, you can also decide. Because yeah, I feel like playing Berlin, because actually fighting within this rubble is actually quite cool, especially now that Berlin has rained quite often. So yeah, like Berlin became quite fun to fight again now. Alright, until soon, preferably until very soon later. And of course, like the video and subscribe if you're new. And share this with other enlisted players so they don't miss out on the important stuff. Until very soon, goodbye.